things are getting harder and scarier and hotter, I'm not prepared to do nothing about it.
Lived experience plays such a key part.
I find a lot of my young people are not engaged in politics at all.
Being in politics is a risk to your life.
I think young people always felt excluded because most young people can't vote.
Politics honestly impacts like every single aspect of our lives. Welcome to season 3 of Roundtable. I'm Lamaya Sheree. Today we're tackling a big question, politics. Are young people really disengaged or are they just engaging differently?
Gen Z is often characterized as a politically engaged generation set to transform politics. Like, do you agree?
Yeah, I think the way we engage with politics is different. So, for example, less young people are engaging in the traditional forms, so like running to be an MP or joining a political party. But I'd say most of us are very politically aware.
Yeah, I think we have the potential to like really change politics. Like, obviously social media is very different. It's a very new way of engaging politically. But that's kind of our greatest asset that we have over maybe the generations above.
I don't necessarily agree. I feel like I'm on the borderline. There are some young people who are really politically engaged, especially because they're passionate about certain things or they live in certain areas and that's stuff that's brought to them. However, like throughout my work and the work that I do, I find a lot of my young people are not engaged in politics at all. They don't want any part of it. They don't feel like they're included. And I feel like, you know, those groups of young people should also be involved in understanding like what's going on politically, so they can make their informed decisions because ultimately they're impacted by the decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I mean, politics honestly impacts like every single aspect of our lives. And sometimes even the word itself, I feel like, can put people off. And often we forget that politics is literally just ingrained in so many aspects, from like our transportation to our healthcare to our housing. Jade, I'd love to hear about the work that you do.
I'm the co-founder and CEO of Power to Grow Community. We're a social enterprise that supports care experience young people 16 to 25 to get them ready for their transition into independence. So I meet a lot of young people who are neat, who are not in education or any employment or training. Usually the young people that people call them disengaged from, you know, the norms. I have lived experience of the care system. So I think it was really important, and it came from lived experience of my experience of being in the system to then, you know, wanting to support others.
No, that's incredible. I'm sure like a lot of us around the table have lived experience in different areas, and it's like translating that into advocacy.
On that point, I lived in Australia for 19 years before I came here. I know I don't sound Australian, but I was homeschooled. But through that homeschooling period, and because I was a swimmer, being a deaf athlete was such a big key barrier to that swimming, because, you know, we're not accepted in mainstream society. And that was my first in advocacy. I became a panel member for Swimming New South Wales at the time, at around 14 years old. And since then, I never thought it would take me to this side of the world, where I eventually became a trustee for many organisations and, you know, youth board members. So this is like, it's amazing how lived experience in itself propel you to be in your own career.
I just think like lived experience plays such a key part in how we live and dictate our lives. And I think the issue with a lot of UK politics now is, even though we're very active on social media, what controls politics ultimately is MPs and stuff like that. And you look in those Congress meetings or whatever they are in Parliament, and it's all just mainly a certain type of culture, a certain type of upbringing, and a certain type of group of people. And I feel like that's kind of a big issue that I don't know how to tackle it, but I feel like at some point it not needs to be tackled in the sense that they all need to be removed. They just need to open up more space so that more cultures and more lived experiences can enter the political area in the UK.
Exactly. A lot of people don't see themselves represented in politics. And I think, to Jade's point earlier, I think it's very easy to speak from a place of privilege, kind of working in politics, working in this area, and having kind of fellow activist friends who are all politically engaged and thinking that that's the norm. And actually, once you step out of your kind of social circle, you realize that not everyone is able to be politically engaged for whatever reason, whether that's because they don't feel like they belong in these spaces, or whether they have other kind of more pressing issues in their lives that they have to deal with. So I think, yeah, the access is definitely a big point in kind of who politics is for, because it should be for the people. That's the point of politics, the point of democracy. And I think at the moment, it can feel like a very closed world, especially like the world of Westminster, Whitehall. It can feel so far away, regardless of where in the country you're based. So I think there's a lot more work to be done in terms of bringing that world to young people and opening it up to them, rather than kind of saying, okay, everyone come down to London and like, we'll go on a school trip and we'll tour the Houses of Parliament and there you go, that's politics. Yeah. In the past, I'd say I have been quite alienated from politics in the sense that it feels like you can't change anything. I think it was through becoming, for example, an I Will ambassador and starting my youth social action journey and using my own lived experience of mental health, mental ill health, and being in hospital to kind of shape the systems. I realized that personal is political, and by making changes in your own world, you are influencing politics on a broader scale. So I think it's just about maybe challenging the traditional idea that we have of what politics is, and getting more young people to be like, oh, you're involved in your local community, you're doing stuff with other people. That's political. Mm-hmm. Like for some people, even their existence is political. So.
And also just to say, you're definitely not the only person who feels alienated. I literally read something recently that 57% of young people feel like their voices just aren't listened to by political leaders. Like, that's nearly 60%, whereas 88% said that they feel like their voices should have an impact in political decisions. So, like, the vast majority of young people feel like they want to have a say, but they don't feel like they're listened to at a national level. And I think the onus is obviously, of course, on political leaders to actually do more to engage young people. But I also mutually always say, like, let's be clear about what it is that we're asking for. The amount of protests and like events that I've been to that will call for change, but won't say specifically what change we're like asking for, or we're calling for equality, like what does that look like? So I also think it's equally as important to be really clear as to like what the tangible aim is that we want to achieve in our schools, in our universities, like with our like families and our home life. Like you said, like the politics is also personal. So I think being at the same time simultaneously clear about the change that you want to see is intrinsic to like any sort of activism or advocacy more broadly.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a preoccupation with people needing to call what they do political. I don't think it even matters if you don't associate what you're doing as political. It doesn't change anything. I think the idea about politics is the distribution of power. And because as generations change with social media, and that's where like Gen Z, I know your original question about, are we set to change the course of society? Yeah, because we've got a new tool in our hand, which is social media, which distributes power differently to the traditional institutions. So of course they will change it because they've got new instruments. But at the same time, every generation, the younger generation always feels disempowered, disenfranchised. So again, we have to kind of think about, is this a new phenomenon? I think young people have always felt excluded because most young people can't vote. So in the traditional realms of politics, of course, young people feel disenfranchised because they can't vote. But what they can do is kind of shape the steps before they can vote. So when it's time to vote, they put in the infrastructure. So that's what happens. That's why arts and culture have become really important political tools, because they give young people an idea of like the belief systems, and they kind of signal who they would vote for, from who the most popular artist is to where you go. Those are all like political indicators that one day when you're able to vote can translate into something like that. So sometimes I'm a bit like, it doesn't matter if you don't think something is political. I think it's about trying to unravel what they're trying to say. They probably feel like they don't see themselves in Parliament, as you said, but where do you see yourself? Because that's not where all decisions are made. Very powerful decisions, but that's not where all power is. So I think even for those of us who are activists, I think sometimes we don't need people to feel as though they need to use the word political, because we kind of like, we then replicate the same issue and go, you don't see yourself as political, you're not understanding.
And on that point, and the point around alienation of young people in politics, because I'm a trusting for white women, I see a lot of the alienation because of the safety of democracy. Being an MP or being in politics is a risk to your life more now than ever before. A role model out there, Jess Phillips, who is the MP for Violence Against Women and Girls, she's spoken out on her experiences in her role because of people like Elon Musk trying to troll her on his social media platform. And I think that really put up a lot of, let's say, young women going into politics, which I think, you know, we're moving forward. We don't want to keep going back. And I think as a young guy who wants to work and has worked with many incredible young women, I don't like to see that backsliding. I think that going backwards when, you know, we have to think about all these marginalized communities, the part where we made the most progress with women. So if we're backsliding on women, then everyone else is going to be backsliding. And I think that's really dangerous. And I think that that's why people are feeling alienated because of their safety. And, you know, they feel like they're going to have their voice heard or their decisions to be made.
It's interesting that you say that because for me, I feel like in terms of that, the alienation piece of it, for a long time, I was very against voting. I was very against being a part of any political stance. You know, I remember when people used to be like, oh, you should run for like an MP. And I was like, nope. I refuse to do it. And I feel like that was coming from a place of not trusting the system and feeling like that we live in a generation and in a time where a lot of things are fixed. I'm not saying that my mindset is like where it was back then, but I definitely feel like, you know, being a part of something, voting on something, being able to say something and then you never see the change that you want to see. You know, the people in power that do make those decisions, I don't feel like I can give my trust to it. So am I really voting because I trust that person to make their changes, or am I just voting because? It's kind of like a weird situation to be in because I feel like that personally, but when I'm as a professional, you know, I want to be able to teach my young people and give them knowledge because knowledge is power for them to make their own decisions. But I guess my biases come in where I feel like from when I was growing up, what the decisions that I was making in terms of when you were allowed to vote and when I've been able to vote, I just haven't. And I feel like I've been pushed to do it just because to say that I've been a part of it. I do feel like, unfortunately, a lot of people say a lot of things, they're going to do a lot of things, and then when they get the chance to, it all falls behind. And that goes back to where I speak about, you know, people saying, oh, you should become an MP. I feel like sometimes people, unfortunately, go into those roles and forget what they actually went in for. And it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of the noise and not remembering where you actually started.
I think if we saw more politicians sharing their lived experience, people can relate it more. I think with this government this time around being predominantly from state school, that has resonated with quite a lot of people, but there's still more stories and all these MPs to share that can relate to it. That's why, you know, certain political parties and the, you know, other extreme sides of politics are able to resonate with those people. The people who are in government, that are in opposition, they're not being able to make their case because they're not opening up and they're sitting behind their shells and, as you say, being really scripted, not showing their real authentic self. I think that's where people can now really see through that kind of barrier and that kind of shield that we know you've lived a life. You can't be this empty to be a prime minister, to be someone on the front bench, to be an opposition leader. There's more to you that we want to see. And if you can't show us that, how can we put our trust in you? And I think going back to the question with Gen Z being a political generation, I think we're the loudest generation, that's for sure, because we have social media. But going forward, how do we now translate that into role model? How do we translate that into decision makers?
The thing is about political parties is that they're just so broad. Like, they represent so many different views or attempt to represent so many different views. And whilst one MP or two MPs might represent you, there might be another MP, for example, in that same political party who has completely different opposing views to yourself. So it's difficult to build trust in that kind of arena.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that I've really battled with myself personally, just kind of thinking, okay, this is a party that, for example, a certain party that I feel drawn towards and I would vote for, have started doing things that, or let's say there's some members in that party that don't stand for the same values that I do. And it's that dilemma of, okay, can I justify voting for this party when, for example, I have loads of genderqueer friends and they're amazing human beings, and the fact that their very existence is being threatened by a government, it's really kind of got me to think about those questions. I think where I've come to with it is that there will never be a political party wherein every single MP or person or representative speaks for you. You can't agree 100% with any party, because then we'd have like hundreds of parties and the political system would never work. I think it's about my values and which party most closely aligns with those values is the one that I'd be inclined to vote for.
In my career, I'm an actor, so I'm in a very, very diverse world a lot of the time. And I feel like it's really interesting to me listening to how, I guess you would say, left or more liberal side of people really talk about politics. But just kind of on that, I feel like I see in young people kind of in general, like it's very easy to put it on the systems, put it on the governments, but as well, like we're one of the loudest communities, yes, but we also, like, even if we don't cast a vote, a lot of us don't even register to vote. And I feel like that puts us in a certain point of view from a lot of the higher ups, a lot of the classes that do vote, where it's like they're making the most noise, but they're not actually doing enough. So I feel like it's so important for us as young people that even if we spoil our ballot or on voting day, we need to exercise our right to register to vote. Because I know for me, like, me myself being a Christian, I believe in Jesus Christ, I believe in his sacrifice. But I'm very aware that some parties will say, oh yeah, we're a Christian party. And then you actually look at the policies and it's like, well, no, you're not, because it doesn't align with my views. So I think, like you said, it's about finding one that most aligns with your views, but also making sure that regardless of our views as a generation, even if every single one can trust, we have to exercise our right to vote. Because I can speak for myself, I didn't exercise my right for the first 3 years while I was able to, because I thought it was a load of rubbish. And I feel like we've got 5 or 6 very politically engaged people around this table, all who represent Gen Z. But that's not the norm. Like, you go into rural areas, you go into like places outside of London where it's very much like still English culture. People who are like training to be mechanics or like working 9 to 5s out in the countryside, a lot of them who are our age do not engage politically at all. And I just feel like it's very easy for us to get wrapped up in the London diverse culture and believe that's the norm.
I like that point that you brought in your faith into it, because that's something that I've always been trying to like reconcile, politics and faith, or Christianity more specifically. So, and it kind of links to what people were saying, is that I sometimes think there's an assumption that politics doesn't reflect young people's voices, because there's such a diverse group of young people, or different religions as well, that people believe in, that actually might reflect the politics that we have. So when we think about that, do you feel as though, like, as a Christian, there are certain values or certain policies that you feel like are more representative of the faith than there are currently? Or what would your vision be, type of thing, for?
I think it's a really tricky one, because ultimately in this day and age, like, the world is a very diverse place, especially when it comes to London and the different ideas. I feel like, as me personally, because of what I believe in, allows people to find peace and find truth. And I know it goes against a lot of what we accept in today's world. That's the state of the world. But because of my beliefs, I would often push for something that pushes more Christian values, because I believe that can ultimately make the world a better place and actually engage younger people. Because, I mean, God says in the Bible, which I believe in, that it says that young people, the people of today, like, we're the children of God, we're the ones that need to help try and spread the word of God and spread his message to the world. And if we're able to do that through politics, then we're able to reach everyone. Whereas today's young people, like, we're able to, yes, say on socials and all these things, like, this one aligns with my views the most, but we're not actually able to implement any proper change as young people, because we're still not allowing ourselves to have access to politics that we actually are capable of having if we exercised all the rights and all the availabilities that we have.
No, for sure. Especially now, like, the state of the world, as you're saying, we all know there's like so many humanitarian crises happening at the same time. And one of my biggest frustrations is that people who say they're of faith, they're not stepping in and lending their voice to something that could probably shift that direction. We're seeing many other faiths being persecuted, right? And as Christians, sometimes our faith is used to actually oppress others. And I think that's a conversation that, as Christians, we don't talk about the relationship between Christianity and politics. And therefore we have this kind of like obtuse or naive view that, like, if Christianity was applied to politics, it'll be a better place. But as you mentioned, certain demographics might actually be persecuted under that if you subscribe to a certain view of Christianity. Whereas, as you mentioned with peace, we should be the ones who are actually lending our voices to like a lot of the genocides and saying, actually, as Christians, we don't want this genocide because we don't believe in the death of people. We believe in the sanctity of life. We believe in the sanctity of children who are being needlessly murdered all over. So it's interesting sometimes that conflict between politics and faith, because unnecessarily they seem like they're in conflict, but that's because I don't think a lot of people of faith are really interrogating politics in a way and actually not just being led by, I guess, the world.
I just feel like there's, with whatever kind of faith or whatever kind of point of view on the world you have as a person, there's always going to be the point of view you have and then a political messed up version that everyone else sees. So I know for me, like, for example, before I took time to read into it, there's a very messed up version of Christianity. There's also a very messed up version of being a Muslim. There's a very messed up version of being a Hindu, all these different kind of beliefs and systems. But I thought I knew, and I was like, that's definitely true. But I feel like it's important that us as young people, we don't subscribe to the political version of that viewpoint, that we actually make the effort to take time and discover these things for ourselves. Do you know what I mean? So we're not letting what the mainstream media, letting what all these certain type of people in these certain classes that are making a lot of the rules with their distribution of power dictate our views for us, because we just go, and do you know what, I believe that.
Yeah.
I guess it's tricky. And I think what is actually really interesting is, obviously you mentioned like faith, you've mentioned your friends who are queer. Like for me, racial justice is like intrinsic to everything that we do at my organisation, Enact Equality. And I know we were just speaking about trust, right? And I was asking myself, okay, like when we're speaking about trust, what does that mean? Like, what trust am I putting in political leaders? And I'm thinking, do I trust any political party to actually like tackle racial inequality, for example, which affects like myself, my family, like a lot of my friends' lives? And I just don't know if I can see that. And someone was mentioning about like lack of authenticity, and I completely agree. I think you will see political leaders that will say things like, you know, we want society to be more equal, or we want more racial diversity at like national level. But like, do they really care? Like, are they actually applying that in their day-to-day lives? Are they actively anti-racist? And actually, what I would say is that there are obviously like a variety of political leaders who definitely lack authenticity. But I think there are some that have actually become more authentic and are saying their true, real thoughts, which is actually pretty terrifying. I think there are particular political leaders and particular parties who are actually like standing on business and doing exactly what they said that they were going to do. And I really hope to see others who are more aligned with my views take radical steps as well to actually like create a more just and like a better, more equitable society for like especially oppressed groups and marginalized community. Also, what you said about politicians and like the abuse that they face, I completely agree that it puts off young people. It puts off me myself when I see Black women MPs in particular and like the vile racist and sexist abuse that they get. It definitely put me off like going into elected politics, because you're thinking about your safety at the end of the day.
Do we think that politicians owe us this sense of authenticity in the world that we live in with social media and everything being transparent? You'd hope that politicians should bring their full selves to work and kind of show the world their whole lives? Or is there any part of that is separate, that is allowed to be their personal lives?
I think there's a really great leader who has shown that. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, before she left, she was really a role model for a different type of leadership in terms of kindness and being transparent and being able to show your full life. I mean, she got married when she was PM, I think. She had a child. She really showed the full power of being an authentic leader, because a lot of the media focuses on the big nation leaders, which typically are not being really authentic. You forget there are so many like small countries around the world with some incredible leaders doing incredible things. So New Zealand, one of them. In fact, Canada, with their new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has really shown he's become the man of the moment, and I hope he continues that.
Are we saying whether politicians and MPs should show more of themselves? I feel like to a certain extent, yes. But I also do think there are some things that you don't necessarily need to bring. It's the same with like being a public speaker and speaking about your lived experience. You know, I got to a place when I was being a public speaker and always talking about my lived experience because I wanted people to resonate and understand and see where I'm coming from and why I started my organisation. But as I'm now moving further down my career, I'm choosing to not mention about my lived experience every single time, because now it's not just about my lived experience, it's about what I do, what I stand for, you know, how I decide to walk every day and how I carry my values. And, you know, I can speak about that, but it has to be the topic of the conversation every single time I walk into a room. So I think that that authenticity has allowed people to have somewhat trust into me to now follow me with my next steps and what that's going to be like. So I do think that when political people go into spaces and places, that they shouldn't be afraid to share those parts of them, because those vulnerabilities can also bring them people that are going to support them moving forward. But I do think that there is a thin line between it. And if I'm answering your question, I wouldn't know the answer completely, because I do appreciate that can be very scary being vulnerable like that, and people in the media are very quick to tear you down and to use it against you. And, you know, even when you were speaking about, you know, being a black woman, being in a political space, even being in that space is quite scary. You know, like the people around you in the parties are like gunning for you and all of that stuff. Like, it's quite a scary place to even be vulnerable at that time. And also coming from an aspect of being a practitioner, working with young people day in, day out, when we speak about politics, I feel like there are certain young people that are probably in spaces and places as well, being an advocate myself, that are being, you know, supported to have their views and to, you know, being able to create spaces where they can share their views. But my issue is where the action comes in. You know, you bring me into this space, you put me on roundtables, you let me speak at conferences, but I'm not seeing any change. And it's like, then when I work with my young people who haven't been in those spaces yet, they're like, okay, well, Jade, like, what did you do? Like, what change did you make? And I'm like, well, I've been a part of X, Y, and Z, and I've done this. And I'm like, okay, but what came of it? And I don't have anything to say. So it's like, you know, I see more and more people allowing young people into spaces. Some people, it's just a tick box exercise to say. And then some people is, okay, I really do want to hear, but then they don't actually try to action what the young people have asked, or, you know, try to find a way to be transparent with the young people. And a lot of the time people don't do that because I feel like they're scared to let a young person know what the reality of the real world is. And actually, we should really be transparent with our young people about that, because change don't happen overnight. It is a process. And if we don't be transparent about that process with our young people, how do we expect them to want to be a part of the process?
I would say that's not just an issue even with young people. That's across the whole political spectrum. Like, in the work that I do, we work directly with like political leaders across all political parties. We literally work on behalf of some politicians, and we will write to like government ministers, and the response will be so generic. And that's an MP and a peer who's writing to that government minister, and you're not even getting like a real tailored response to another political leader. So imagine if that's like a young person writing to their MP, for example, or like a young person trying to like lobby for a particular change in like a bill or something. Like, that is definitely something that happens or is an issue across the entire political spectrum. So I definitely think it can be disheartening. And what you just said is literally key. Like, it's a process. It can take years to make certain changes. I say that, but I think back to COVID and how quick the government were able to move on something like that. And I understand, obviously, that's like a massive global health emergency, but at the same time, that means that we are capable of making quick changes for things that we genuinely care about. If you compare that to something like the online safety bill, looking at like safety on social media, like that took years and years and years. And I know that obviously it takes a while to pass a law, but at the same time, I'm like, how many political leaders use social media? How many of them like know the intrinsic issues that are happening like on young people's phones every single day?
I think ultimately, I feel like it depends on the culture and the environment you're in. Like, I feel like for a lot of young people, it is social media. But then again, you take a step outside of London and it's not in social media, it's in a village hall with like 50 people. And I feel like it's so easy for everyone to think like, oh, this is where our voice is heard, we're going to make a massive impact. But then if you actually look at it, social media is a great tool when it's used properly. But the issue is that 95% of the time, it doesn't actually ever impact the BBC, the ITV, these big corporations that basically run the UK. It feels like a lot of the time that when we're discussing politics and a lot of bills and a lot of changes that we're suggesting, that it's not people going, okay, what is best for the country, cool, implement that there. they already have this foundation of what works for their culture and their lived experience. And they go, what bits can I chip away at mine? So I can give them a little bit, just enough to make them happy for now. And then I'm just going to keep my foundation. And then eventually I'll remove it and I'll bring back what I had. It feels like we're never actually progressing for massive change. It's just always, they're just giving us bits and pieces.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think obviously that could be seen as a radical, but we're not asking to dismantle systems. I think the systems that we're in do not work, and we're trying to find reform within systems that don't work. So what you're saying is that on one policy, you might have a little bit of a win for a certain group, and that group, because they've got their needs fulfilled, they now abandon the rest of the journey. And we see that a lot, especially like with Black women, when it comes to feminism. There might be movements for women to gain rights, but when it comes to Black women, not everyone continues on the path. And we're left alone and we're saying, hello, hello, hello. But because they've got their equal pay or whatever it is, now they're happy. Even our voting system, right? It's done in a way where it doesn't even reflect all the votes that are happening. It doesn't reflect all people's ideas, or even when you don't vote. So I think there's a lot there about the structures that have to be torn down and built up rather than looking for the reform. Yeah, so social media, I think, is generally obviously a good place to be heard, as you said, because I can speak and someone from a different continent can hear me. But as you said, it doesn't mean people are listening anymore. I think as social media matures and as Gen Z matures with it, we will start to understand the extent of its impact. I think because we're just living it, everyone tries to be so like forward thinking, go, this is what social media is. We don't know. Social media hasn't been around that long for us to really say the impact of it. All we can say is that this is what happens when we do this, this is what happens when we do this. So I just think with social media, everyone wants it to be that tool that it fixes everything. And now we're onto AI. And now we're onto something else. And the same problems that we had before social media was attached to social media. And the same issue with social media was going to be attached to AI and all these other things. So it's just one of those ones. It's human beings don't want to look at the fabric within ourselves and say, we are the problem. It doesn't matter what platform you're on. If there's people with ulterior motives and people who only care about a certain 1% of society, that will be reflected in all our political instruments. But if you don't want to dismantle those instruments, then we're going to be here for another 20, 30 years. And the next generation, they're going to be like, we're the generation to change it because we've got floating robots. And we're going to look at them like, that was us with social media.
What spaces and places like make you feel like your voice might be heard?
So online, I guess the word changes, but I guess I'm involved in like digital advocacy where I create like bite-sized political content. It's actually ironically called Everything is Political. And it basically looks into every single topic you can think of and basically show the political lens in it. So when people say, I like football, I'm not political, the Black football is political for these particular reasons. And we talk about the class aspect of it, right? And then the greenwashing, all those other things that are involved to make people feel like, actually, I'm still involved in some sort of political system. I just don't articulate as political. That's what I do. And it's basically to meet people where they are. It's to make people feel like you don't have to now go to uni or have a proximity to certain power to feel like you're political. Everything you engage in is political, and hopefully that gives people the power to participate in conversation.
What kind of change do we want to see in our lifetime, and like who do we want to see lead this change?
For me personally, in my lifetime, I would like to see like a free Palestine, a free Congo, a free Sudan, a free people free from any sort of oppressive system, whether that's even locally in the UK, whether it's young people who have a very like negative relationship with the police, to poverty and world hunger. So I'd like to see that in my lifetime. And who will do that is all of us. It's us, the people of the world, global citizens, taking up the mantle and saying, the decisions don't end with politicians. They should reflect us, and if they don't, they're obsolete. So it's us stepping in, like how can we build structures that mean we don't rely on politicians, that they're actually just there for decoration more so. And if we say something, it goes. And that's us stopping supply chains, that's hitting capitalism where it hurts, and saying, we will shut everything down until you listen to us because it's people over profit.
I want to see change in politics is that it's never going to be, but what I always want to strive towards it is eradicating stigmatization of marginalized groups. Like I'm a decision maker, I'm a trustee, and I'm also an athlete as well. I make a lot of decisions in my life, and I always know people don't trust my decisions ever because there is this stigma, especially being deaf and dumb. And that is something that's always stuck with me my whole life growing up, is that he's deaf, you never have any ideas. If he's deaf, he will never have anything to contribute. It's funny because I look back and I go, I wrote all of you now. There's a bit of an irony in that. But it always feels like I'm a very ambitious person in terms of I always want to build the bigger ideas and keep going up and up. But the higher I go, the more I realize people just don't trust me and think I have experience because I'm deaf or because I have a disability. It's remarkable because in this country, deafness is the second most common disability. You would know that. There's about, 16, 18 million deaf people in a country is around, 68 million. But that's just like, that's a whole, nearly a third of the population that is deaf. And yet there's no, when I see government in particular, my work is, trying to get the government to invest in the Deaf Olympics, to invest in deaf athletes, because the Deaf Olympics existed many, many years before Paralympics. It was the pioneer for disabled and sporting rights. Deaf Olympics is what made deaf people and people with disability assimilate into the mainstream society. Yet throughout the last 100 years, we've been dropped before other more fancier disabilities that look good. People without an arm, people without a leg, people are blind, but people with invisible disabilities like me get left behind. And I see my mother, who was born and raised in London, and she was a performing artist, but she was also the only South Asian person in our area, and she was also the only deaf person in our area. And she always tells me, 60 years later, I'm seeing my son go through this. The same thing what I went through. And people haven't changed, but that's where my motivation comes from, is that I'll keep going higher and higher if I have to until someone goes, oh, he has a point. Because it plagued me for my life so far, being 21. I don't want it to plague me for the rest of my life. And regardless, if I have children and they're deaf, I don't want them to play this well. So I think that trust in politicians, the trust in the establishment, it's got to start at looking at things and investing in it. Invest in the talent, invest in deaf athletes, invest in actors, deaf actors, invest in deaf politicians, because that has a trickle-down effect.
If I could jump in there, like me personally, I've got cerebral palsy, and growing up, like just kind of speaking on what you're speaking about, when I was growing up, especially in terms of like allowing there to be change, I know that I worked ridiculously hard on my physicality so that it would then become invisible. And that was always my motivation. And I feel like for a lot of people, it comes across as like, oh, Michael is so strong, like he didn't let it defeat him. But it wasn't like a motivational thing of, I'm going to prove him wrong. It's like, I don't want to be associated with that and so I worked ridiculously hard. I feel like the change that I want to see, because we're seeing it a lot in terms of like any kind of marginalization. You see people not going to uni, not applying to uni or not trying out for the football team, because I don't want to be that one person at football team that's like this. I don't want to be that first person. And I feel like the change that I want to see isn't people going, okay, if I can like just act a certain way or change the way I am or try and behave a certain way to fit in, then I'll go and do it. And I will be the first one because I've transformed myself into being part of the rest of society. I actually want to see the change where people go, no, this is me, and I'm doing this to represent others. And I know that's one of the things that I've struggled with massively. Like you're a brilliant person for doing what you're doing. It's a testimony to your character, like to have that bravery and that courage. I know that I didn't have that growing up. I was always there like, yeah, I've got cerebral palsy, but it's fine because I can walk normal now because I've trained and I've worked on it. And so, yeah, like I just thought that was really nice, and it'd be a nice way to see that change happen, especially for like younger us.
Yeah, when it comes to like invisible disability or just invisible lived experience, it doesn't have to be disability. It feels quite lonely, and it feels very, very like, no one's talking to me. And that goes back to the discussion about politics, is that I'm trying to find someone that looks like me, talks like me, or even represents what I feel. I think that it gets abused and manipulated by other parties to say, well, we can promise you all this, and you vote for them, and they say, well, actually, it sucks to be you. And I think that's where the politics needs to change, the system needs to change, where I feel like I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket with one person or one political party. That's why back in Australia they have like proportional voting systems and compulsory voting, which is something I'd love to see here, because we have more choices now today than ever before. I would have loved to have voted for 3-4 parties based on my preferential ranking, so that I know if it doesn't go to one person, it goes to another. That's not being wasted elsewhere. And it also encourages something I'm really big on, people who don't want to vote to spoil the ballot and say, I'm not happy with the choices that are on the table.
I think activism can take lots of different forms. When people talk about activism, they think of, I'd say, Greta and kind of pushing this brilliant agenda and linking capitalism to climate change and linking the oppression of marginalized groups to climate change and to capitalism, and like just showing how intersectional everything is. But activism doesn't always have to be that kind of in your face. I think there's a lot of incredible work being done that's quieter, that's less interesting as a headline, for example. But I feel like with petitions, with boycotts specifically, are and have proven to be really effective, because money makes the world go round. And by boycotting certain companies and brands that don't align with your principles and that fund things that you disagree with, you might think, okay, I'm just an individual, and obviously the issue is not with the individual, it's with the big corporations and the institutions. That being said, there is always something small that an individual can do, whether that is signing a petition, whether that's going to a protest, or choosing, I don't know, to buy from an independent coffee shop rather than a mainstream one. There are little things that people can do every day that make a difference. Things are getting harder and scarier and hotter, and I'm not prepared to sit back and do nothing about it. With that comes something that I've also struggled with a lot, is this responsibility to constantly be showing up. It can be exhausting, and I think as activists, as young people, I think it's really important that we also take that time to appreciate the change that we have made, however small that may be, and to spend time with like-minded individuals to kind of like create our own sense of community of people who are also in the same boat of doing things that might be uncomfortable and might be difficult and might be challenging, and we're doing them anyway because we believe in the greater good, whatever that may look like for us. What are the little things that you guys do to make your world a better place?
Well, I guess for me, it's about making I show up for my own people and be a part of my community. And again, hold myself accountable to what I say I'm going to do for them. A big thing with young people is that they lack trust, they lack hope. And I feel like something I do in my organisation is show them that that was once me, but also give them a reality and the tools that they need to navigate the rest of their life. Because, you know, there's so many things in this world that I want to change. But I do think that unfortunately we live in a space where we're not setting our young people up to succeed. A lot of the systems are setting them up to fail. And for me, it's about making sure that I'm doing my part in my community, because those young people that I'm impacting could potentially impact someone else, or they break that generational trauma for their children. And hopefully, like, as I do my research, and petitions are great for research, and research helps you get more funding, research helps you get more time to do the thing that you need to do, it will impact like on a wider scale. But for me, something that's really been important for me is that I'm happy making change within my community, because I know that can make a trickle effect. You know, it's mad great to want to aspire to change the world. I would love that. But I know that I've got to start somewhere, and I'm starting at the heart. And it's really important for me because that relatability and that lived experience piece allows me to give my all. And I don't get tired about that, because, you know, sometimes you do get frustrated, but I never get tired about that, because that is rooted in what I believe in and where my values align.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree. I think there are definitely things that all of us individually can do, right? And especially in relation to the advocacy piece, like petitions, etc. Like I run an advocacy organisation, Enact Equality, where we literally do the petitions and we do the co-sign letters and stuff to government ministers. And I definitely think you can see a tangible change when you do certain political processes. So, for example, we did something around Afro hair discrimination, right? And the fact that Black children are sent home from school as a result of having their natural hair, like in afros, locks, twists, braids, and so on. And as a result of the work that we did in that letter, like sending the co-sign letters to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, etc., they published new policy guidance for education providers across England, Scotland, and Wales. And now we're seeing like thousands of schools change their uniform policies to remove clauses that banned afros and braids, etc., so that Black children can go to school with their natural hair. So I think something like that, you could literally see a tangible change from when you began the process to what the end goal was.
The change that me personally, I would I try to do in my community, and I feel like makes my world a little bit calmer, a little bit more peaceful, is I'll be honest, I just try to spread God's word. I try to evangelize to people, to get them to I don't try to put the Bible on them in any kind of way. I just try to offer it to them, because from my personal experience, that word and his presence brings peace to people. And I feel like even a political sense, like we often talked about that, the distribution of power, and how a lot of people in this world, like they're not authentic because they say one thing and they go out there and they kind of, oh, I'm in charge now, so I can do what I want. I feel like if we bring Jesus Christ and God into this topic, then all of a sudden it's that humility of like, I need to do what's right for the people, not what's right for me. So for me personally, that's my like personal objective, is try and get as many people, and especially if we can bring that into politics, I just think the world will be such a better place.
It is actually already brought into politics. Like we've had quite a lot of roundtables with like political leaders and like pastors and church leaders, etc. And I mean, there's also a church underneath Parliament, so like inside Parliament. So like some of the politicians like will go to like will go and pray and stuff like in the middle of the day. So I think there's definitely a relationship there between like social justice and church leaders and politics already.
I feel like you can't stop bringing faith into politics, because it's like it's asking the human not to bring the human into politics. It's a part of you. It shapes your outlook on society. It shapes your sense of what is just, what isn't just, what is good and bad. The politics itself is based on commandments or like God's law, even if we don't use it like that now. But at the same time, I feel like it's your interpretation of faith and what you consider human life to mean and represent that will determine how that religion affects your politics. Because there's atheists who do good. So it's not a condition to be a good person, but faith is supposed to be reflected that those of you who say you're of faith, you represent who you say God's character is. And if you say everyone under God's eyes is equal, he believes that everyone should have access to food, love thy neighbor, all those things, then society shouldn't be bad. But as I said before, it's human beings who are faulty enter that place, and they utilize religion. You can utilize any ideology, actually, to progress their gain. So I feel like religion has got a bad stick, rightfully so, because religion has been responsible for a lot of negative stuff in society, so therefore it cannot be trusted. And so for me, I would never advocate for people to be like, this is from a church perspective anyway, because that's when it gets sticky and it's subjective. But at the same time, if your religion isn't harmful, then it shouldn't be an issue. So that's why people of faith have to interrogate that and go, well, we have to have some honest conversations about, is there homophobia in Christianity or whatever religion? And if there is, what authority has God given us to then oppress people who identify as LGBT? That's a very different conversation. That's why people say you can be like, oh, I'm not necessarily for what you do, which I don't even like that concept, but some people say that. But should I then say you should not have access to healthcare? That's not a religious argument. That's somebody saying you're using the authority of God at the end of the day, and that's not for us to do. So that's how I feel about religion. It's not for us to play God, basically.
Yeah, I mean, my thing on religion is if it drives you, then I'm all for it. I always love it. I'm not religious myself, but I kind of am really spiritual in that sense. When you go to a long university, then you really go to a dark place. You can't help but to believe in like a higher power in that sense. But my role in religion is always playing persons with disability, and in religion, I'm always the charity, I'm always the weak one. And that's why when people do talk about religion to me or say that religion is their drive, I'm always a bit, and then it goes back to your point, they're in a very honest conversation, but not everyone, like you say, wants to have that conversation and can have very tunneled vision as well. And if there was anything in politics, it's that stigmatization of people in general, people with faith, people from marginalized communities, people from care background, people with disability.
I just was going to say, like, the first thing that came to mind when we, like, got to the topic of, like, bringing faith into, like, politics was, are people really ready to have that conversation, though? Because it gets deep. Like, you know, and a lot of people get angry and get triggered, and that can create more conflict and whatnot. And I feel like, you know, we live in a society, unfortunately, where people are not ready to have that conversation. So they sometimes use religion as power. They use religion in a way that it shouldn't be used. They forget where the religion started from. It can become like this game of like, who's better, like in terms of like religion. And it's sad that we even have to sit here and say that people are not really ready to have that conversation, because ultimately, where did religion all like start from?
We could talk about this all day, but honestly, thank you so much. This has been so inspiring, even for me personally, and I hope it's been inspiring for everyone here today. This has been Roundtable on 48 TV.